Yo, what is up, guys? It is Daniel back with another chess basics video. Yes, I am grinding these all out for you, especially this week. So if you enjoy, make sure to hit that like button. So today, what we're going to be learning out is the special move of castling. So you may have heard of this before, but castling is a common theme in games, or a common move that is played.
What?
Pretty much the idea, obviously, as we've seen in the past videos. If you'd like to watch chess.com's video, you may. Pretty much the idea of castling is it means that it requires the king to have yet to move, the rook to have yet to move, and for the squares between them to be empty. So notice how this knight on g1 has already moved out of the way. This bishop that was on f1 has already moved. So there's no pieces between them. The king has not yet moved. The rook has not yet moved. So they can castle. Now you may be asking, what does it mean to castle? Well, castling means that you move your king over 2 squares and your rook to the other side. So that means the king would come to g1 and the rook would come to f1, which is a strange move, but it is actually very helpful. Pretty much the idea behind castling is it gets your king out of the center. Notice it gets your king to the side because we want to protect our king. Remember, the whole point of chess, or of the game, is defending your own king while threatening your opponents. So you want to keep your king safe, keep it to the side rather than in the center of the action, and bring your rook to more of the center of the action, maybe with an eventual pawn pushing or moving your rook to e1 or something like that. But yeah, so that's the idea with castling. Also, you can castle queen side. So this is castling king side. Remember, because this right side of the board, at least because from white perspective, is the king side, the side of the kings where they start, and this side with the queens and to the left is the queen side. So this is castling to king side. Let's see how it works. Boom. So that's what it looks like, and you can do it in chess in a game online or in a tournament game. Okay, so notice how black is already castled because his king, there's no pieces between his king and rook because his rook was here, his king was here. And remember, it's you move your king over 2, your rook to the other side. That's true whether you castle king side or queen side. Okay, can you find the move to castle white's king? So I know we just started learning about castling, but there is at least one rule I've told you about. Well, I think I've told you more, but there's at least one rule, and that it's these squares have to be vacant. So, can white castle kingside? No, because the bishop on f1 is in the way. The king cannot come here. The rook can't take his own piece. That is illegal. So white cannot castle kingside. However, as it says over here, white's king is prepared to castle queenside. So the king's going to come this direction. Now the question is, let's see if you listen carefully. What square is the king going to end up on? Because if we're castling king side, it would be g1 for the king and f1 for the rook. Where's the king going to end up when we move it to the left? It's gonna, if you listen carefully, it's gonna end up on c1 because I said no. Well, I mean, it's not just because I said, but I told you that the way that castling works is the king moves 2 squares, so 1, 2, and then the rook comes to the other side. So the rook will come to d1 when we castle. Notice how it's we can't go all the way over, but we can't go to c1. And I think we talked about this before in the notation video. I will put that above my head, but castling kingside is notated as 0-0, whereas castling queenside is notated as 0-0-0. So 3 zeros for queenside, 2 for kingside. Okay, here's the next rule about castling. It is fairly simple once you get the hang of it, but it does take a bit to get the hang of. If you are in check, you can't castle. You can't castle to get out of check. So in this position, we are in check. Do you see how? This bishop on b4 is attacking our king. And because of the rule I just mentioned, we are not allowed to castle kingside. We see, look. Notice how the only moves that the computer allows us to make are with the king, or just regular king moves. It does not allow us to castle because castling while you are in check is illegal. So that is another way that you cannot castle, or a position in which you cannot castle. So yeah. So it says, can you find the best way to block the check? So obviously we want to castle, so we don't want to move our king, because remember, if our king or a rook move, I guess I didn't really clarify this. If the king moves and then it comes back to that square eventually, you still lose your right to castle. If this rook ever moves, then you can never castle kingside. You could still castle queenside maybe eventually, but not with this rook, not to the kingside. If this rook ever moves, you can't castle queenside. If the king ever moves, you can't castle either way, because the kings require both the moving kingside, or castling queenside and castling queenside. So even if you put the piece back on its original square, if it moved at all, you can't castle. So it's asking for the best way to block. So we don't want to move because we want to castle, and if we move, we violate our right to castle, or we forfeit our right to castle. Sorry. Only other blocking moves. We can't capture this piece, this bishop. Only blocking moves are queen up and pawn up. Which one is better? Pawn up, right? Because we don't want to lose our queen for a bishop. We don't want to do that. White wants to castle kingside. Okay. Here is another rule regarding a position in which you're not allowed to castle. You are not allowed to castle through check. Now, what do I mean by that? In this position, we are not in check. The rook is blocked by our bishop. But notice how this bishop in this corner eyes this f1 square. Because we are not allowed to castle through check either, not just if we are in check, but also we can't castle through check, we are not allowed to castle kingside, because it'd be as if we were going f1, then g1, and we're not allowed to go through check. So, because the bishop blocks that square, we are not allowed to castle kingside. Let's see, if we click on this king, yeah, it's not even an option to castle. Or to move here, notice, because the bishop guards these squares. But yeah, so we can still castle, but not to the king side. So what does that leave us with? And what square is the king going to end up on? It's the queen side, and the king's going to end up on c1. The rook on d1. Notice this is the O-O-O. I leave it as 0. I think it's fine too. White's rook on the king side is already moved. Notice it is not on its original square, so we know we cannot castle kingside. Also notice there's a reason we can't castle queenside either. Do you see why? So notice that we're not in check. We're not even castling through check, right? Because no piece is threatening this d1 square that we would be going through. But notice that when we're finished, because we would end up on c1, we would be putting ourselves in check from this sneaky bishop all the way on the other side of the board. You're not ever allowed to purposely put yourself in check. So castling right now is illegal. However, there is a way to block this bishop's eyeing of c1 and then castle. Do you see how to do it? Okay, so there's multiple ways, I guess, to break this. But there's only two, and only one of them is really good. You could push this pawn 2 squares. Unfortunately, then the bishop just captures it, and we've just lost a pawn. Or we could push g5, in which case, if bishop captures, we could capture back with the pawn, and we just win a bishop for a pawn, which is good for us. So in the other options, if we push bishop here, yes, that bishop is attacking this pawn, but notice that when we castle, our king is here, and it actually defends this b2 pawn. Also notice, this may be kind of complicated, our rook will be on d1, right? Because that's what happens when we queenside castle, and we'll be putting black in check. So he has to respond to that first before he could even think about taking our pawn, and our pawn's defended by our king on c1 anyways. So yeah, that's the move. And boom, check. So yeah, that is castling. It's very useful, again, as I said, for getting your king out of danger and putting your rook in the center of the game. You'll see castling in almost every, even like intermediate and beginner level games. It's very common. There are some games in which it's actually safest not to castle, but usually it's almost always safest to castle. In fact, a teaching idea or method is telling students to just castle before they even start attacking, because king safety is more important than your attack. If you attack but your opponent attacks first and wins before your attack gets to its fruition, then you lose. So you should make sure to put your king's safety first as your top priority. Someone once told me the goal of chess is to not lose. And if you play that way, eventually your opponent will make mistakes and you can capitalize and win. But yeah, so make king safety top priority. Yeah, hopefully y'all enjoyed this video, found it productive, instructional, and I will see y'all in the next one. Bye, guys.